and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. On this edition of the program, we discuss one issue only, the fate of Julian Assange and the fate of journalism itself. Cross-talking Assange, I'm joined by my guest here in Moscow, Xavier Moreau. He's the founder of the Center of Political Strategic Analysis, Stratpol. And in France, we cross to John Laughlin. He is a lecturer in political philosophy at ISIS, the Catholic University of ND. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Let me go first to France. John, I was reading an excellent article by Chris Hedges, which was republished in Consortium News, titled, Chris Hedges, the martyrdom of Julian Assange. Is Julian Assange a martyr for journalism, a martyr for the law, maybe a martyr for justice? Go ahead.
I think there's absolutely no doubt about that. I mean, we know from the moment that he left the Ecuadorian embassy in London that his original claim made 7 years ago, that he was trying to escape extradition to the United States, was true. Even though all his enemies denied this. The extradition demand was produced immediately he was released from Ecuadorian asylum. And as you also know, Peter, better than anyone, the video of that moment when he came out of the embassy door came, of course, from Rutley, from RT, because they put a live feed on, watching, I think, for about a week. And they, I hope, made a lot of money from being able to sell this short video clip. The fact that RT got that scoop, if you like, got those images, is itself deeply symbolic, because I hardly need to say that not only was it profitable for RT, but it was such an immense propaganda coup for Russia, or counter-propaganda coup, to see someone who is a journalist, who has published true information, not fake news, who has published information about war crimes, about political shenanigans, being bundled into a police car and effectively bundled on the way to the United States of America, exercising extraterritorial jurisdiction in another country, is so deeply shocking, I think, to anyone who has any sense of media freedom, that it only makes it even the more disgusting when we see newspapers like The Guardian or the Daily Mail dancing on Assange's legal grave and saying what a horrible person he is. Because the issue here obviously is not whether he is a horrible person or whether you agree with him. It is a matter of media freedom. And in previous programs, Peter, we've discussed the legislative framework that's being put in place in Europe to restrict media freedom. Here we see what I talked about a week or two ago, the use of the criminal law to suppress information, and this is what we call dictatorship.
Yeah, you know, Xavier, Julian Assange is an Australian citizen, and his own government didn't lift a finger. No surprise there. WikiLeaks is an operation that is not based in the United States. Thus, the Department of Justice now is making a claim that its reach is global. If the Department of Justice determines that you have committed some kind of crime, espionage, for example, against the United States, you can be prosecuted anywhere in the world.
Yeah, and I would like to underline that, on the contrary, on Manning or on Snowden, Julian Assange never worked for intelligence U.S. services, so he's not a tweeter of anything. And listening to Mr. Pompeo telling that he's a member of a non-state intelligence agency, it's completely crazy. And of course, I couldn't agree more that using its extraterritorial power, not only for fighting on the economical point of view, but even for fighting against the freedom of speech, it's incredible. But you know, I'm quite disappointed again by President Trump, because he used to say that he likes WikiLeaks because it helped against the Clinton gang, and
it was really quite amazing. Went from I love WikiLeaks to I know nothing about WikiLeaks. That was a very cowardice moment.
Disappointed.
Very cowardice.
disappointed.
Let me go back to John. in France. The interesting thing is here, too, is that I see that the United States, because it no longer is able to control the global narrative, it is lashing out at the institutions that can challenge that narrative, and that is WikiLeaks. I want to reiterate over and over again, not one thing that WikiLeaks has ever released was, everything was authentic. Unlike the major news outlets that dominate the Western world, they have become stenographers of power. And Julian Assange and people like Julian Assange have said, no, there is something to see behind the curtain. They want to put the curtain back in place. John.
Well, can you imagine what the reaction would be in the West if Alexei Navalny were bundled from his hiding place into a Russian police car and prosecuted and sent to prison for his so-called blogging against corruption? As we know, we've had this narrative now for years that Navalny is a lone voice on the internet denouncing Putin's corruption. The image that is presented of Alexei Navalny in the West is precisely what Julian Assange has in fact been doing in the West in a much more important way, because he's been, as you say, Peter, publishing information which is true. He's been publishing documents. He's been publishing secret documents, but he hasn't been publishing some narrative. He's just been literally publishing documents. And we've been treated now, as I say, for decades to this propaganda about bloggers standing up to power, this fairy tale about people like Navalny, but there are people, you know, in similar fairy tale positions all over the world, presented as great freedom fighters by the United States and its Western allies.
You know, let me stay with John here just for a second here. I think it's very interesting, too. People don't know about it because they're not told, but then Bradley Manning did approach major Western news outlets about the information that he had at that time, and they all said no. Then he went to WikiLeaks because the major news outlets no longer perform a journalistic purpose. Their purpose is to maintain and further official narratives. John.
Well, we knew that. We saw that when The Guardian, which of course originally published some of the WikiLeaks documents, then agreed to sit down with the secret intelligence services of Britain, otherwise known as MI6, and to destroy together in front of the officials of MI6 their hard drives containing this information. That act confirmed that The Guardian is an MI6 newspaper. It's an MI6 outlet. A number of its journalists work for MI6 and produce narratives concocted by the British government. One of them writes a lot about Russia. I'm sure you know who I mean.
That
is the status. That is the truth about these newspapers, and that is the or other media outlets, and that is the reason why, as you say, then Bradley Manning did not have any success with them. So, you know, we are in a situation of the most breathtaking hypocrisy.
Yeah, you know, Xavier, you know, I guess what's most disappointing for me, being a journalist myself, is that so few journalists actually stand up for the profession and for say, you know, if you have a long enough memory and if you want to remember, WikiLeaks was considered a profoundly professional, excellent publisher. Now he's not even a journalist. He is just, as Pompeo's words, you know, it is an extension of someone else's foreign intelligence. It's amazing how people have flipped. I guess it's because of their material interest, not because they have any integrity.
And, you know, and the worst, it's in my opinion, you will see London and Washington continue to lecture the rest of the world. It won't change anything. And unfortunately, I remember when WikiLeaks published some very interesting information on the U.S. Foreign Department, especially the influence on the French policy, on educational point of view. You know, to encourage the gender policy, to encourage the immigration policy, and so and. It didn't have any use. Actually, nobody used it because in French, as in England or in the United States, all the information from WikiLeaks, they are known by me. They are known by people like me who want to know what really happened. But it's useful, actually. That's a big problem, in my opinion. And again, this scandalous treatment of Mr. Assange won't help changing things.
You know, John, right before we go to the break here, I mean, WikiLeaks came into being, it filled a niche that was absolutely necessary, is to hold power to account. And that is his greatest crime, is holding power to account, because that's exactly what journalists were supposed to do. That's what the Fourth Estate was supposed to do. They don't do it anymore. It was left to him to do it, and now the state wants to destroy that. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, well, I mean, we all remember, don't we, those horrendous images of Iraqi civilians being shot dead from a helicopter, which were part of the WikiLeaks revelations in the early years. I mean, genuinely shocking evidence of war crimes. But I want to make a point that Xavier, or develop a point that Xavier made just now about extraterritoriality. Because, as we know from this case and from other cases in commercial law, for example, when the American Justice Department imposed a multi-billion-dollar fine on a French bank, and as we know from the way that the American government uses international criminal justice to further its foreign policy ends, but of course never allows international tribunals like the International Criminal Court, indeed forbids them to have any say over America. We can see that this extraterritoriality is a one-way street.
Yep.
It is the American empire without, I'm not trying to be polemical, it literally is the use of American law, in this case by means of an extradition treaty, but with an ally which will inevitably, unfortunately, comply with it. It's the use of American law to further American policy, including American security policy, in clear violation.
Okay, John, I have to jump in here. Thank you for joining us here. We're going to go to a short break now, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Assange. Stay with RT. All right, now we're joined by Alexander Mercouris in London. He is a writer on legal affairs as well as the editor-in-chief of theduran.com. Welcome to the program, Alex. How is the press reacting to this story about Julian Assange's arrest, particularly how abruptly RT's news agency picked it up first? Kudos for us. And what is the general reaction to all of this? I know Brexit hovers over everything, but this is a very important story. Go ahead, in London.
It's actually pushed the Brexit news to one side. It's been heavily covered. There's been a lot of awe and some jealousy for Rutley getting the pictures. The British media are frankly a bit jealous that Rutley and RT got there first, so well done. Now, as to the media coverage, it's been heavily covered. Very, very great criticism, some of it actually, I think, rather vicious criticism of Julian Assange, and a lot of coverage of attempts which are coming from Britain to get the Swedes to revive the rape allegations.
You've got to be kidding.
You've got to be kidding. I mean, there's even 70 MPs have written a letter about this, basically to say, that if those rape allegations are revived, which they haven't been, of course, they should be given priority. And of course, the reason for that is, to come to the next part of your question, some embarrassment, a lot of embarrassment about the way this whole thing has played out. I think a negative reaction from many, many people. So by reviving the rape allegations, people are able to say, well, we're not very keen on this extradition to the US, but we still think that Julian Assange is not a good person who has a lot to answer for, so we can still criticize him. So I see it personally as an attempt to basically damage Julian Assange's reputation. And I have no doubt that it'll be to the United States that he will be extradited, if he's extradited at all, and not to Sweden, which is showing no enthusiasm for reviving these rape allegations, which were dropped partly because he was, in the Ecuadorian embassy, but also after Julian Assange provided a very detailed statement in which he responded to the allegations, which very few people seem to be aware of.
No, it's amazing. The British want the Swedes to reopen one of their investigations. Yeah.
I mean, it's something like Moscow trials. Because it's not only a question of putting him in jail or executing him. Well, it's about destroying his own image by false information.
This is politics through smear. I mean, all of these people that are criticizing him on both sides of the Atlantic, they refuse to comment on what he actually did reveal war crimes and corruption. They don't want to talk about what he did. They want to talk about his character. I don't care one way or another about his character. And this is a perfect media ploy to destroy someone and to ignore what in fact is actually happening. Xavier.
If you look at the French media, it's more neutral, I can say, because it's not so important case for us. But actually, it's wrong, because the French media, the French journalists should have defended Assange from the beginning, but they don't do it. And don't remember that the France was ashamed because we stopped the plane, the Ecuador president plane, because we were thinking that he's going to take Assange with him. So again, there is, as you said, there is a US empire, an empire of lies, and we are all Western countries supposed to follow this empire. And it's a big shame, not only for Britain, but as well for France, not saying anything to try to protect, which is supposed to be the ground of our Western civilization. It's the freedom of speech and the freedom of right, what we think it's true.
You know, it's absolutely right. I mean, the U.S. likes and its allies like to export their values, but they don't live up to their own values at the same time here. Alex, you're a lawyer. It seems to me that the DOJ they're just strategizing how to create a legal strategy. Again, this is a hostile prosecution. It is not based on facts that we know. I mean, talk about transparency. That's synonymous with the WikiLeaks transparency. I don't see the same kind of transparency from the prosecution. Go ahead.
Well, indeed, exactly. And one of the things that absolutely astonishes me is that you see so many journalists around the world cheering this prosecution on because of their hostility to Assange. And yet, of course, what this is, at least as I read it, is an attempt to get round the protections to journalists provided by the law. And one would have thought the journalists, putting aside whatever feelings they may have about Assange, would see that as a direct attack upon them. The Committee to Protect Journalists has made that very point, by the way. So have various people like Glenn Greenwald, and every journalist should be concerned about this prosecution. It is a very serious case. It's been brought out of time. It alleges a conspiracy where the facts are incoherent and amorphous. Alan Dershowitz's words, not mine, by the way. And on top of everything else, in order to prove that conspiracy, they have to, it seems, rely heavily on the testimony of Chelsea Manning, who is not actually providing testimony and is being kept in indefinite detention until she does, which I would have thought is also a very troubling thing. And Savvy is absolutely right when he talks about the collapse of Western values. Since when in the West have we been keeping people in indefinite detention until they testify against someone else? I mean, we are slowly slipping, it seems to me, into Moscow trials territory. Smears against the accused and pressure on other people to get them to testify. Very bad in every way.
Well, it certainly sets a precedent here and a very bad example. Go ahead,
I would like to add that the only reason which was given by the US administration for prosecuting Mr. Assange is that it's supposed to have helped Manning to find a password to go inside. So it's something that won't any kind of evidence will be given for that. Well, but as long as we'll be in the United States, they will give him in a jail for maybe 20, 25 years. Or
well, I mean, if this is the standard, then indictments should be made against the Washington Post, the Guardian, CNN, all the rest of them, okay? Because that's what publishers want. They want more. Because what Julian Assange was doing was not illegal. It was illegal for then Bradley Manning. He was in uniform in the service, and later Chelsea paid a very high price for that, okay? And it was all under the Obama administration, an administration that had a war against whistleblowers, put Chelsea Manning into confinement, even under conditions of torture, and then they all pat themselves on the back by giving clemency. Okay, and now this witch hunt against whistleblowers continues, and that's Alexander Vickers. Let me go back to you. That's the whole point, isn't it? Really, though, it is a chilling effect. That just make sure that no one ever does it. No one challenges the empire and its narrative.
Who is the next?
Well, we come exactly to the point that you made right at the beginning, Peter, which is exactly that this is exactly what the purpose is. It is to people don't want to discuss the things that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks have exposed, the war crimes in Iraq, the rigging of the democratic primary process. All of those things are no longer being talked about. What we're being talked about are all these other things, which are basically an attempt to discredit Assange, discredit WikiLeaks, and make official narratives, put them beyond challenge.
You know, Alexander Vickers, what I thought was really interesting, when I watched all of the American cable, with the exception of Tucker Carlson on Fox News, all of them, almost without exception, are trying to reignite the Russiagate hoax, okay? the connection between Assange and the Russians. There is no one scintilla of evidence that ever happened. Let me go to Xavier here. Yeah. I mean, they're trying to, again, change the subject, not what he reported, not what WikiLeaks released, but what kind of bad company Julian Assange supposedly has.
I think the aim is to conceal the way that the US administration wants to rule the world. Because, you know, before the meeting between de Gaulle and Kennedy in '61, the French intelligence service warned the general that the CIA is listening to him. And so he said, it's good for them. But the problem now is the U.S. administration has so many things, so many murders, so many mass murders, so many bad things they did to conceal, that they have no choice but finding any kind of you know, a new accusation against Russia Today, against, of course, WikiLeaks and Assange. So, you know, it will go on. They are going to continue again to lecturing all the countries in the world what to do to protect the human rights, to protect the freedom of speech. But for them, because they are chosen by I don't know who.
But see, this is basically Pentagon Papers 2.0, and the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the main Washington Post, and specifically is not trafficking in stolen government material. It was in the public interest that the people learn. This is no different. But the difference is back in 1971, journalists uniformly stood beside Ellsberg, okay? Yeah. And in this case, they're uniformly against Assange. Last 10 seconds.
Yes,
Xavier.
And this is hypocrisy, because for the journalists everywhere in the world, the example to follow is the Watergate. Because it was a question of sending Nixon out of the function of president. But no, this example is no more followed by anybody.
You know, this is much, much bigger because its impact is immense, and it is setting a precedent that is endangering all of us that have dissenting ideas. Yeah. That's it. That's all the time we have, gentlemen. Many thanks to my guests here in Moscow, London, and in France. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, Crosstalk rules.